All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. So it looks like I'm going to be talking about our good pals with the Boston Celtics today. We're supposed to have my man Cal coming in. Let's see. All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. I'm here talking with my brother Big Cal. Got a lot to talk about today in
Hey,
regards to the Boston Celtics. Cal, how's it going, my man?
I'm good. I'm finally in there like swimwear. How you doing, my good brother?
Man, I can't complain one bit, man.
All right. Well, so where we at with it, man? Talk to me.
Well, I've been following a lot of this NBA season, as have you. And for me, my biggest thing is the Boston Celtics. I look at them and they've been an enigma. This was a team, you know, they made the conference finals last year in the bubble. We've seen this team several times under head coach Brad Stevens get to the conference finals, and they were unable to get over the hump.
Right.
And that's one part of it. But also, I'm looking at it too with the Celtics. I give them the benefit of the doubt. You know what? Last year, the break, going deep into the playoff bubble. Some of the teams that like went deep into the tournament last year, they started off a little slow. I mean, we've seen Denver pick it up lately, but even Denver had a slow start. The Lakers were basically able to handle their business until AD and LeBron got hurt. And Miami had their struggles. Of course, Jimmy Butler got hurt. But for Boston, I know that Jason Tatum was out a little bit with COVID. But you look at this team as a whole,
Right.
they've been a big disappointment this year, man. And I wanted to talk about that with you and get your thoughts on that.
Well, I feel this way about it. Number one, the problem with the Boston Celtics is they have no big, really. They don't have a legitimate big man. And I think the way their system is set up, I think it's more set up for wing players. They don't have a legitimate point guard. Well, I won't say Kimba's not a legitimate point, but to me, I don't know how to rank him or even Marcus Smart. I don't really know how to rate them as being offensive players because to me, a pure point is going to distribute. And looking at the numbers between Marcus Smart and Kemba Walker, they don't even average 10 assists together. So that tells you a lot in regards to the leadership. Then you got Jaylen Brown. I think he's averaging about 24 points a game. Again, another wing player. Then you got Tatum. He's at like 25.7 points a game. Another wing player. So I think when you have too many people doing the same thing in the system, I think your system won't be successful. Somebody has to sacrifice their game to rebound. It can't be, I'm going to match you score for score, right? And Brad Stevens, he is a systematic coach coming out of college. I think he brought that system to the NBA with the Boston Celtics, and they found themselves right in the thick of things, some great matches with these kids when they were young. And I just never really saw them, mature into something. And I think part of it is the system is missing pieces. And like you said, they are an enigma because there's no way you go from, the conference finals over the last couple of years to you're anywhere from 6th, 7th, to 8th on any given day, of this season currently. So, my thoughts are, I think they'll be around for the playoffs, but I expect them to go out in a first round easy. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, and I think the Boston Celtics have definitely regressed this year. One thing definitely for me is on the defensive end of the floor because typically Boston under Brad Stevens has played better defense than they have this year. They just don't have
Absolutely,
it.
that's true.
That,
That's
that
true.
there's really no communication, and their opponents are able to do whatever they want to do. Also, I look at it. I think this team, I agree with you, they are too perimeter oriented. And I look at the games of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, their two best players. I think too often that both Tatum and Brown are settling for outside jump shots a little bit too much. I think, it needs to be a balance as far as, the outside shot, your mid-range game, and also getting to the basket. Jason Tatum, he's a decent post player. The same could be said for Jaylen Brown, but I think both of them have the ability to drive and get to the basket more, and I don't think that they are utilizing that enough. We talked about Kemba Walker. I like Kimba's game, but the thing is, Kimba simply does not fit this team. They need
Right.
a point guard, and they also need a big. And I think, getting back to, Brad Stevens, I look at him and I'm not going to sit up there and say, well, Brad Stevens, maybe his time has run its course in Boston. But the problem is he definitely needs to adjust, because in college, you could get away with not having a big and win. Very rarely can you do that in the NBA. You need some size. You need somebody in
Right.
that front court who's gonna give you somewhat of a presence. And honestly, you know, for what it's worth, the Boston Celtics, they're gonna, at the best right now with this team, the best that they can do is what we saw last year when they got to the conference finals. Because you look at it, um, on a series, with Philly right now, the way that the Sixers are, I know that the Celtics beat the Sixers last year in the playoffs, but the way that the Philly is playing right now, and when Philly's on all cylinders, Boston cannot match up with them.
No,
Um,
not with this year's team.
no,
No,
no.
not at all.
And I mean, with the Brooklyn Nets, you figure if Brooklyn's gonna have everybody on board come postseason, yeah, it's gonna be very dicey for the Celtics to hang with them as well. And those are the two teams that you have to get through in order to get out of the East. We haven't even talked about the Miamis and the Milwaukee's, teams that are still going to be a problem for a team like the Celtics,
And they
in,
are. That's correct.
in the postseason. So I think right now, I think the philosophy has to change if you're Brad Stevens.
I agree. You definitely want to see some defense, but usually uh, your rebounders are pretty much decent defenders. Always thought Tristan Thompson was a little bit of isn't a true bench player. I didn't think he's a first tier type of guy. Who are some of the bigs on Boston? They slipped me at the moment.
Well, they don't even play Taco Fall that often,
Right, Taco doesn't play right.
so I mean, it's like they basically gone, small ball. But again, Tatum and Brown are not consistent outside shooters. I mean, it's like, for me, Jaylen Brown, the best part of his game is getting to the basket with his athleticism. He's not a jump shooter. And the same can be said um, about Jason Tatum. All of their three top guys, you're talking about Tatum, you're talking about Brown, and then you're talking about Kemba Walker. All of these guys are streak shooters.
And I like Marcus Smart too. I think you know, if I had to pick any guy off that team, the first guy I would probably pick is Marcus Smart because he has a lot of heart. He's going to play defense, and he's going to make the right basketball play. That's what I like about him. And so you take that, you kind of build a little bit. And I said maybe last year that Boston had to break that up. Those two guys, you can't have two guys doing the same thing. And that's ultimately what you have in Tatum and Brown. They're doing basically the same thing. So then you go back, you look at some of the bigs, some of the guys slip my mind right now, but it's nothing worthy of note because the team doesn't revolve around the bigs.
Right.
And again, like even when you had the system over in, let's say, the Spurs, the system they run, their system is kind of, in a sense, it kind of reminds me of what Boston tries to run. But the difference was they had star quality players. They had true players that could play down low. They had guys that could bang on the wing. They had a little bit of everything. Even when you go to the triangle offense in LA and Chicago, um, it's cool. You might have this person that can do this person that can do that, but everybody collectively steps in, plays their role, whether they're going big or they're almost going big, and this is how you put it together. So, like I said, it's something missing out in Boston. And I'm going to tell you, whoever's in the Eastern Conference in that 6th, 7th, and 8th spot, I'm going to look for them to get annihilated in the first round because it's as simple as this. The three top teams in the Eastern Conference have consistently played like the best three teams in the Eastern Conference. There's really no drop off. From them to the 4th place team, it might we never know from day to day who's going to be. It might be Miami, it might be Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? It might be the Knicks. We don't know. It might be Charlotte. We don't know who's that 4th. 1 through 3 we know. 4 and 5 interchangeable, but anybody from 6, 7, and 8, like I said, it's going to be a problem. I see Boston getting there maybe 6th to 7th. I think they're like 8th or 9th right now. And they got on the schedule coming up, they got the Blazers, the Denver Nuggets, and the Lakers. All right. So this is a test for them going out on the West Coast as a West Coast swing. And if they could, get it together and win some of these games, that would be good for their psyche going into the playoffs. But the big thing with them is if anybody is smart that's playing against the Boston Celtics, I make them play how we play. I make them play big because they're not going to be able to really, really, really defend big because they're too small. And
Right.
to me, that is how you beat Boston. I would just go flat out big.
No, listen, you're 100% right because you look at it, and this year when Joel Embiid is healthy, Boston doesn't have anybody to stop him.
No.
And they're better. Like Philly is better coached than they were last year, and then on top of that, they have more depth. We've talked about that before. With the fact, right?
Right.
And credit to Doc Rivers. Doc Rivers doesn't have Ben Simmons trying to be a perimeter shooter. That's why you have Seth Curry. That's why you brought in Danny Green. Right.
That's right.
You still have Tobias Harris. You have Dwight Howard, and see that's another factor right there. Philly has Dwight coming off the bench. Dwight doesn't have to score. Dwight just has to go get boards. But the thing is like, Boston does not have anybody to match up with Dwight if he's coming off the bench, and he's just going to get boards because you figure even at the offensive end, somebody takes that shot and misses. Dwight gets that rebound and kicks it back out. That's an additional 14 seconds that you have to defend. And that's frustrating to an opponent. So I'm looking at it, and listen, I'm just not seeing it. And like you said, 4 through 8, anything can happen, because it's been so up and down. And I think Boston should really be ashamed of themselves because you look at it, and you look at Charlotte. LaMelo Ball is out for the rest of the season, and these guys are still balling. You still got Gordon Hayward down there, Terry Rozier, a couple of ex-Boston Celtics. Atlanta's made their move ever since Nate McMillan became the interim head coach. They've definitely picked up things.
Lemon Pepper Lou also has stepped the game up down there.
Right, and on top of that, the Knicks. The Knicks got some dog in them. They're gonna keep fighting. You know what I'm saying? They're gonna scrap. The way that they've been playing all season long. So if you're Boston, you could mess around and find yourself in a play-in game. I think, Miami is picking it up as well. So, Boston's they really need to get their act together. And like you said, this West Coast swing right now is important for them. But, I think the Celtics, they consistently are losing games that they shouldn't lose. And I don't think that Boston came into the season with the right mentality. You get to the conference finals, you got to say, hey, you know what? We're this close. Let's put in that work.
They did it a few times though. This last year wasn't the first time. They did about
exactly. This is the third or fourth time under Brad Stevens that they made the conference finals. But like again, they gotta put in that work, and I really think that it's time for them to really adjust their philosophy because the small ball ain't working. You know what I'm saying? And we've seen enough of it. And I think first and foremost, for me, it's either one or two things have to happen. You got to go out there. You got to get yourself a big. And if you're not going to get a big, who's going to score? If you just get a big that rebounds. But guess what? Somebody's got to sit Tatum and Brown down and say, listen, hey, you guys are not perimeter shooters like that. We need you to get to the basket more, be more fundamentally sound.
But see, the thing about that, with them getting to the basket, in the playoffs, everything changes. They clog the lane. So they're going to be forced to have to shoot and be perimeter players. They're going to be forced to have to knock down those shots. But see, the whole key to it is the type of shots you're taking. And I watched Boston repeatedly this season, and probably this season more so than last season, take some horrible, horrible shots. Their shot selection is poor. And it's like somebody has to take these shots. And then I look at how Kemba, when he starts the offense, he's killing too much of the clock dribbling the ball, to me. You need to be a little bit more decisive with your movements. So that means that, to me, with them having lost as many games as they've lost this year and where they are in the playoff pack, yes, they've regressed, and but you can't really put one finger on it. I can't say that, a lot of times they come out flat. You watch them, they're flat. They're going to lose from the time, after the first quarter, they're going to lose. I believe they lost a game recently was it to the Knicks? They might have lost to, I think. Somebody like that recently, where they just came out flat, they played a little bit, and then got back in the game, and then gave the game up. These are games that usually Boston would win. You understand what I'm saying? The inability to put teams away, in that last quarter, or you keep going to Jason Tatum, and he's off. He keeps taking that same shot, and he's not making that shot. You got to adjust and do something else, and that goes back to coaching, brother.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what you're saying, Danny Ainge, the Celtics president of basketball operations, a Red Auerbach disciple. And of course, Red Auerbach ran things for so many years with the Celtics. Danny Ainge knows everything about the Celtics because, he was part of 3 championship teams. And he wasn't just a guy who was riding the pine.
Right.
Danny Ainge, was putting in that work as a player.
He was.
And Danny Ainge, he's a basketball lifer. He's a winner. I mean, you're talking about a guy that got to the finals with 3 different teams. He was one of those guys, unfortunately, that lost to Michael Jordan in back-to-back finals. So it's one of those where he knows what it takes to win, and he knows what it takes to win with the Celtics organization. With that said, okay, I wonder if Danny Ainge would be willing to channel his inner Red Auerbach, because remember, if you go back to the Celtics of the Larry Bird era of the 1980s, success did not necessarily mean that you kept your job as a head coach. Because remember, during that tenure, they had several different head coaches during Larry Bird's time. Casey Jones was probably the most successful. But if you look towards the end of the 80s, the Celtics got bumped out in the first round by the Knicks. I want to say that was when Rick Pitino was coaching the Knicks. And the next thing you know, Jimmy Rogers got replaced by Chris Ford, like that. And you figure, Jimmy Rogers was a long-time assistant of Casey Jones. But you know what? Red did not like the fact that the Celtics lost in the first round. And on top of that, he was not thrilled that they lost to the Knicks in the first round either. So you look at it, and I wonder if a first-round exit this year for the Celtics would lead to a shakeup there. We'll have to see.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Danny Ainge is already on record as apologizing for putting that team that's together that we're currently watching in Boston, for putting that team together and, not maximizing some of the trade deals, some of the deals that were on the table, because he was trying to make moves before the trade deadline. But what ended up happening was, if you're not going to make a move that's going to help your team, don't even make the move. So I guess probably that's what he ended up not doing, because they have draft picks. They got stuff to move around from some of the other trades they made in the past. So for me, I don't know. I think Danny Ainge, him admitting that he didn't do a great job with this year's team, I think it might be time to break those kids up that's playing together. I think, it's just they just don't fit. To me, if I got Kemba Walker, then I don't need Marcus Smart. If I got Marcus Smart, then I don't need Kemba Walker. They're essentially pretty much the same player. One just averages 6 more points more than the other one does. Because I believe Kemba's at 17.7, and you got Marcus Smart, I think, at 13 points a game. So it's not much of a drop off. Kemba's averaging maybe 4 or 5 assists. Marcus Smart might be 3 or 4. It's not much of a drop. What I'm saying is I would have an explosive 2 guard, which you actually have in Jaylen Brown. But at the end of the day, the way he plays the game is not really helping his team. And I think he's the most important person that will probably have to change the way he plays, or you trade him and you get somebody to fit into that system. I would keep Tatum, but I would probably let Jaylen Brown go. What do you think?
Well, I think, at some point, Boston's going to have to bite the bullet on it because, again, just to piggyback off of what you're saying, when you're building a championship team, you need guys to complement each other. But like you said, you can't have guys that are doing the same thing. If you're going to go out there and get yourself a Tatum, then, you got to have yourself a big, or you got to have yourself a point guard. And they don't have that. I think when Danny Ainge structured this team, he structured this team for guys who got along with one another. But you know what? Getting along is well and good. That's fine. But you know what? Can you win championships? And I think he wanted to, get away from that Kyrie Irving element. And I think, to me, that's where the beginning of the end, started for this. Because you look at it, the Celtics were playing pretty good before that. And they gave up that first-round pick that they had from the Nets, and they gave that to Cleveland in order to get Kyrie Irving. And of course, that was a recipe for disaster. Kyrie never fit in there. And the Celtics really regressed that year, and they actually got better when Kyrie left.
That's
But
correct. That
yeah,
is correct.
but you look at it. I mean, to me, that was a wasted draft pick for the Celtics, because I know that draft pick turned out to be Colin Sexton, and he's having a solid career,
Yes.
start of his career with
Yeah.
with Cleveland. I'm not saying that the Celtics would have taken Colin Sexton, but it's a situation. You need to go out there and get you a big, and you have to get guys that are going to do different things on the court. And
That's
I
right.
think at the end of the day, you need to adjust your system. I mean, to me, I think the only way that Brad Stevens is there next year, in my personal opinion, or should be there rather, is if he's going to make some adjustments to his system. But if you're telling me Brad Stevens is going to come out here with the same Celtics team next year and do the same exact thing, that ain't going to fly. It just isn't. And I mean,
No.
you figure we've had nearly a decade of
Yeah.
what Brad Stevens can do, so we know what he can and can't do at this level, and not taking anything away from him. Brad Stevens is a good coach, and I'm not, and
Yeah,
I'm not,
I agree.
I'm not going to slight him on that. But it is time to adjust what you can do. If this was a situation, if the Boston Celtics were a college basketball team, oh, Brad Stevens would be the Coach K of things right now. But the
Right.
NBA game is a little bit different, and I think it's time for him to adjust.
Oh, absolutely. He definitely needs to adjust, but the adjustment is going to come in the form of players. That's the only way he can make it. I don't think he can coach them any more, any less than what he's already doing. So the adjustment has to come in the form of, I wouldn't so much say draft picks, because the draft picks, some of them need a little time to mature. You need free agency. You need to sign guys that will waive, that specialize in certain things that they could do to bring certain element to your team. Boston, there's nothing scary about Boston on paper or in person. Nothing. They don't have anything that I would consider what you would need to go to the second round of the playoffs on their team. They're like a new age. They're like these new age teams that are playing. But I think with the Lakers winning last year and using the formula of the old bigs and bringing back that big bruising style of basketball, I think it's kind of back to a certain extent. Because if you look at the Nets, you look at what they got. You look at Philly, and it's all revolving on the basketball being played inside out, not outside in. And if you look at the Golden State Warriors, that outside in is being phased out. They can't win that way. And now they're learning. So now everybody's looking at Steve Kerr the same way they're looking at Brad Stevens now. All right. But only difference, of course, Steve Kerr has got rings, but it's the same situation. You got the same guys on your team out in Golden State. This one does what this one does. You know what Stephon is going to do. You know what Draymond is going to do. Outside of them too, and the other kid is nice too. O'Brien, I think that's his name. He's
Mm-hmm.
nice, but it's the same thing. You're not going to win shooting jump shots. So if we come in, we come in and we're big, we're gonna force you to play big ball because we're gonna pack it in and not let you go to the basket. And this is something Damian Lillard is gonna learn the hard way also. Because to me, the Blazers remind me of the Boston Celtics again. The same type of team. They have some decent bigs out there, but they don't play no defense. So that's what, so to me, watching the Celtics in the next 3 games, you'll get a chance to see just how much better teams with bigs are than they are. They might get lucky and win 2 out of 3, or they might lose all 3. Because like I said, they got the Blazers, the Nuggets, and the Lakers. And even the Lakers depleted are still bigger than the Boston Celtics. The Denver Nuggets are bigger than them. The Blazers, even though I think their centers might be hurt or something, they're still bigger. But, to my point, the adjustment needs to come in the form of players, man. That's what I see. It's nothing else Brad Stevens can do as far as coaching and scheme-wise.
Yeah, I mean, like definitely something has to be made. A move has to be made, and I really want to be interested to see who the Celtics are going to try to wheel and deal this off season, because something has to be done. And my whole thing is this: it's like if the Celtics don't go out there and get themselves a quality big, don't have to be like a Jokic type or Embiid type, no, but if you don't go out there and get yourself a quality big, you're gonna have a problem. I mean, obviously this trade would not happen, but I'm just throwing his name out there. Bam Adebayo. A guy like that would give them a presence. Obviously, Miami's not giving up Bam Bam anytime soon. Definitely not to an Eastern Conference opponent. But I'm just saying, like, a person like that, just for the sake of argument, it's a situation where they got to go out there and make some adjustments, because if not, I think, if they don't, this love affair in Boston with Brad Stevens will, come to an end very soon. Because remember, you're talking about a situation now. The Boston Celtics, for the longest time, as an organization, were able to hang their hats on the fact that, hey, no other NBA franchise has won more championships than us. They can't say that because the Lakers are tied with them. And the Lakers have really come on strong in the last 2 decades. Of course, they won the 5 with Kobe. They got another one with LeBron, as well. And then, of course, they won that head-to-head 5-3 in the 1980s, with Magic and Kareem going up against Bird. So it's one of those where they've really closed the gap. And actually, they've closed the gap because they're tied now. So, pretty soon, just for the sake of argument, let's say the Lakers win another title and they pass the Celtics. Then those people in Boston, they can't hang their hat on that anymore. And
Right.
and then when that happens, that love affair is gone.
Yeah, I agree. I'll tell you what. Boston had a good run, and I watched them over time. I watched them when they were really good, and then when they had to rebuild, then they got it back together. Then they had to rebuild. I've watched them time and time again. But over the last few years, they have been consistent with Brad Stevens. You watch them crawl, and then you watch them walk, and then you watch them run. So he's been very consistent as far as getting those young players better. Yes, they all have gotten better, especially Brown and Tatum have gotten extremely better from where they came from, but they were expected to be decent players. I wouldn't have if you'd have asked me 2-3 years ago, would both of them be all-stars this right now? I would tell you probably not. Somebody, either their play would fall off or, somebody wouldn't meet the expectation, but so far so good. But I don't think they're enough to hang their hat on to get out of the first round. I don't think so. I don't think with the bigs that they have, because I can't even name anybody past Shaq and Tristan Thompson. I can't name anybody. That and what that tells you is that if you can't name somebody, that means that whatever part of that game that you can't name, that means is non-existent for Boston, because they had some bigs that was really putting in some work over there, at least mid-level work. Somebody out there banging, getting you 12 and 12, 13 and 15. They don't really got that.
No.
Big. So you would notice that, and you'd be like, okay, well, if this guy can rebound, that means he's going to play some defense. Because, again, I'll say this slowly. Most guys who can rebound are pretty decent defenders. And the game, especially in the playoffs, works through defense. The best teams in the league, and Boston was an excellent defensive team at one time, that go into the finals and go into the late rounds of the playoffs, they're all excellent defensive teams.
No, listen, you're 100% right. I mean, they had some quality bigs before with the likes of Enes Kanter and Al Horford. Of course, Horford was at the end of his career. Kanter, he's decent. We saw this guy grab 30 boards last night for Portland, but it's just one of those where if you don't have quality bigs, you're not going to win. And I think like, just to agree with what you said, teams have definitely, they tried to go with the small ball route, and I think people got suckered into it, like trying to follow the Warriors. But people always forget the Warriors had 3 of the best shooters of all time.
You have.
And like Tatum, I like the games of Tatum and Brown. They're not Clay and Steph. They're not KD. So I mean, you gotta be real with it. It's like even with all stars, there's different levels to like all-star caliber players. Those guys ain't on that level. So you're not winning with that. But folks, that is going to wrap this up. As always, I want to thank my big brother Cal.
Yes, sir. Pleasure to be here, William. Pleasure.
For chiming in. You can always check us out here on the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast. You can always check me out on Twitter at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. You can also check both of us out on the Sports Depot 365 on Facebook, as well as Citywide Sports. So definitely check it out. So Brother Cal, as always, it was a pleasure. And we'll be doing this again real soon, my man.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. Take care.
Thanks, man.
All right.